So some of the hottest and best questions that we've received so far this year. Very interesting question that pertains to Hagarat Kilim on Pessah, which is what would be the status of a... Well, let's start with the question as it appears in the poskim, the status of a frying pan. What's the nature of a frying pan? So normally we would say what? What's the rule when it comes to how you...
the way it absorbs space is the way you have to make it kosher.
The way it absorbs is the way it exudes, or the way it relinquishes. So what's the cooking method of a frying pan?
Well, you put fire on it, but it's not the cooking method.
So the example that we have with fire is very funny because the Gemara doesn't talk about this. The mention of this appears, as goes back already to Benot Midyan. At the end of Chumash B'Midbar, by Benot Midyan, we're told by Parashat Pinchas that Kol asher yavo ba'esh yuva ba'esh, Kol asher yavo b'mayim yuva b'mayim. Anything that any kelim that you take from the booty, from the shalal, what you've conquered, the booty is the English word for it. It's not the word has connotations today, but B-O-T-Y literally means just whatever you take after you wage war. So if you go to war and you take money, you take utensils, you take slaves, whatever it is, so it's called B-O-O-T-Y, booty is the word. So anything that of any metal that is normally brought in fire, that's normally used in fire, you bring in fire in order to kosherize it, to render it kosher. Anything that normally goes in water, you bring in water. So if I have the examples given by the Gemara, are metal utensils that are used over open flames. For example, skewers. If I take a metal skewer to make kebabs or the like, shishlik, or if I take nets, this isn't a new concept. Back then they used them also. If you wanted to take fish or a liver, something that needs to be grilled on both sides, you want to turn it over without losing pieces, put it on skewers, it'll fall apart. So you put it in some kind of a net. Askala, they call this in...
or some kind of griddle or something like that. I don't know how you call that in English. In grill.
Well, okay. So grill, yes. Okay. Griddle is where it becomes complicated. A griddle in English is a...
So I meant to grill.
Right. It's a frying pan. Normally it's a thick cast iron frying pan.
Okay, I know what it is.
Or one that has waves in it that lets the fat drain.
Okay. So I meant to grill, but now I'm curious about the griddle.
So the griddle is the fascinating question. So basically the question is like this. When we say kibbola'o, kach polato, what we really mean is the same method of cooking associated with the absorption of potentially forbidden flavors. Let's assume you're making shishlik with teriyaki or with soy sauce, 1000% chametz gamur, no question. And that's where the chametz is actually the flavor of the sauce. It's not like it's an additive or an ingredient. It is the main ingredient. So the skewer may have contacted hot chametz with the assistance of an open flame. Not a problem. I can kosher it, I can kasher it by exposing it to a torch, exposing it to some kind of open flame. Beseder. If I'm using a pot, where we say yavo kol asher yavo b'mayim, so pots that are normally filled with water when you cook something inside them, Hevanti, I understand. Fill it up with water, or put it inside a larger pot that's full of hot, boiling water, and the problem tends to settle out. Anything that's not used with hot water or over an open flame just needs to be washed, and then you take it to the mikveh like anything else. It all has to go into the mikveh, but that's for other reasons, not because of Pesach. That's because of...
You have to re-dip something in the mikveh to make it kosher for Passover?
No, you have to take... If you took something from the goyim...
if you took it from the goyim, yeah.
Yes, you have to dip it in... So technically, when the Torah tells you this, what it's telling you is that anything that would prevent the tevilah and the mikveh from being kosher would prevent you from taking it to the mikveh. So if I have regular utensils, they have to go to the mikveh. Well, they have to be clean before they go to the mikveh, so the mikveh itself is what... this mitzvah needs to take place. Metal utensils used over an open flame, or metal pots and pans, in theory, if you're using water to cook inside them, all need to be kashered with either a torch or some kind over an open fire, let's say, and then in the case of pots and pans, into some kind of boiling water. The rest of them just need to be washed with plain, water. You want to get fancy, use soap, and that would settle it. What's the nature of cooking in a frying pan or a griddle, if already you brought the question up? Do we consider this heat over a direct, is it, cooking over a direct heat source? Except the heat source is not so direct, so why do I care if I'm cooking over skewers or over a grill? there, halachically speaking, halachically speaking, if I'm exposing the metal utensil to fire, it's one thing. The reason we use grills usually is to allow blood, let's say, to drip out. So I take liver, which can't be salted. It needs to be kashered this way, and I put it over something metal that has slits or cracks or holes or mesh, and the blood drips out. But if I use a direct heat source under a pan, and I put meat directly on top of it, what's the nature of this cooking method? In other words, do we consider this to be a dry heat cooking method over a direct flame, or is it considered to be cooking with some sort of liquid, even though there is no sort of liquid?
Well, how often there's no liquid? You usually put some kind of oil or margarine or something like that.
I'm glad you asked. And in the event that you put on oil, the oil itself would be considered enough of a cooking medium that we could then render it kosher by putting it inside of another liquid cooking medium, let's say do haga'ala with hot water? Or is the oil so insignificant that inevitably the food product touches the pan without any liquid intervention? Fascinating machloket. And it ends up being today, halakha l'maaseh, a machloket between the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim. The Ashkenazim wanted to say like this, and this question came up not because of a frying pan, but because of, I have to say, Omer Dvar B'Shem Omero, Abigail Levi is the queen of super duper halachic questions. So the question was asked about, this is very common in yeshivot, koralim, I think Ashkenazim are very into this, where you take what they call a kumkum in French, basically a hot water cauldron, you put it on top of a plata, or on top of an open flame that's covered with a piece of metal, and you have hot water for Shabbat. What happens if I put something like burekas on top of the cover of this utensil? Okay, the thing gets boiling hot, over 200 degrees. So am I cooking via wet method, dry method? Is this considered roasting? Meaning the fact that there's a heat element on the bottom that causes the steam to rise, that causes the thing to get hot, that causes...
Yeah, but what would be the issue? The burekas is cooked already. You want to warm it up, right? So what's the issue?
It's not a question on Shabbat. It's a question of chametz. How do I render this kosher for Pessah?
Okay.
So first of all, it's hot enough that it transfers flavor. So for sure, this would count for Pesach. In theory, you want to add Shabbat on top of this. I put a raw piece of dough, and then is this considered cooking the way things are usually cooked? The answer is no. So on Shabbat, probably, if you put a raw piece of dough or a raw piece of filo or whatever, it may be, to say it's asur midrabanan is even a stretch. We would make faces at you. Ask you not to do it. Make mean faces.
I didn't know that the halachic category.
It's a halachic. It's at the
faces.
bottom of the halachic barrel. It's not asur. It's not dorata dorabanan. It's not even minhag. It's mean faces get made at you. Maybe don't let your kids in the local school. So the question is a very good one. How do we consider, if this is cooking over direct heat, the heat is diffused? Why do people cook in a pan as opposed to cooking in a grill? Anyone who's ever fried steak knows that you retain liquids when you cook in a pan. Or at least you retain control over them. Because if I want to reduce it, I want to deglaze it, I want to add things to it, I have the liquids. So whatever, let's say in the case of a steak, because why use anything else? I'm cooking a steak. The steak cooks. I have a little bit of fat, I have a little bit of proteins, I have some water, I have some purge, there's some sugars. Everything comes together nicely in a beautiful gravy. The heat is being deflected by the pan, so the pan only gets so hot, as opposed to cooking without the pan in the meantime. Liquid enters the pan, but it enters from the food that was already there. It's not like I'm cooking pasta in water. So the Ashkenazim wanted to say, look, because it's a question, we don't know exactly how to handle such a thing.
So it's forbidden.
It has to be asur. There's got to be some grounds for forbidding it. But we consider that this should be, if you're going to kasher it for Pesach, which not everybody's super enthusiastic about, you should do it with a torch. You should take a torch to your frying pan. Why?
Yeah, with your frying
because
pan.
You have heat, and you have, I'm not talking about Teflon. Teflon gets destroyed when you take a torch to it.
But that's
the point. It has to be destructive. So you take the frying pan, you torch it, and this way, if it was cooking in liquid, the Ashkenazim don't hold this way. Lechatachila, b'di'avad, they hold like the Sephardim, that you can do libun instead of hagara. And I'll talk about that in a second too. It's a toss-up. Either it's cooking over a direct flame, or it's cooking with some form of liquid. But there's no liquid there, we have a doubt. So what do? We want to be mahmir. We want to be mahmir, take it to the next level up. Next level up would be use a torch, consider as if it was a grill.
So Libum is the next level up to
It's the highest level.
Hagala. So
There's nothing
if
else
I
you
have
can do.
something that I know I use only with liquid, but I happen to have a torch nearby, I can do it instead of
According to Sephardim, lechatchila you can. According to Ashkenazim, maybe b'di'abad you can. It's not even so clear they all agree to this.
Okay.
That's not clear from the Gemara. The Gemara doesn't make such a statement that you can do libun where you need hagala. It seems like the written source that we just quoted from Berot Midyan seems to say pretty explicitly, Kol asher yavo ba'esh yuva ba'esh. So the worst, the most direct, the most intense form of flavor exchange takes place when you're cooking over a direct flame. So whatever comes into contact with fire needs to go back into contact with fire. V'asher yuva b'mayim, yuva b'mayim. V'asher yavo b'mayim, yuva b'mayim. And whatever comes into contact with water, you can kasher it by putting contact with water. It doesn't say in the pasuk I can do the opposite. Maybe yes, maybe no. Examples of this, or a little bit on a finer level, would be a strainer, a pasta strainer. Right? What do they call this in Italian? There has to be a name.
Setaccio. Scola pasta.
Scola pasta.
Scola pasta.
Like a school?
No, scolare means drain.
Okay.
Scolare, so scola pasta is it in the scola that to drain the pasta.
Got it. So so this thing is never used in boiling water. The only thing you ever do with it is you pour hot water into it.
Correct.
And this, for bishul purposes on Shabbat, it's not bishul b'kli rishon. It's not I have a boiling pot of water. It's irui mikli rishon. It's something that I pour from a kli rishon into. It is itself a kli sheni that absorbs the chametz water by way of irui. Irui means to pour. So pouring from kli rishon. So in that situation, in order to take my skola pasta and make it kasher lePesach, I can take a pot of a new pot or a pot that's already kasher lePesach. I fill it up with water. I boil the water and I pour it all over, and the thing is done. Because the same way that it absorbs is how it.
Assuming you will need
So you don't need
scola
to-
pasta on Pesach.
Assuming, well, they have. Ronzoni
So, yeah,
makes
rice
this.
pasta, yeah, sure.
They have rice
quinoa,
pasta.
rice quinoa.
They have rice pasta at seasons this year.
Rice pasta at seasons. In the market on Ochel Kitil.
They're having kitniat this year.
It's just a crime.
It's such a scandal. No, I love it. I mean, how many Sfaradim are there?
The crime is that they don't have anything useful.
They won't let them sell it on Pesach, but they'll let them
that's what
sell
they
it.
told me.
I spoke to a guy last week.
They told me that as well.
Last week, this guy invited me to a big kosher supermarket in Bergen County. He said, they let me sell kasher lePesach ochle kitniot before Pesach. He says, every year it takes up a bigger and bigger proportion of my market. So how many Sfaradim live in this town?
So
Maybe 300.
the guy at Seasons, I told him today, listen, it's great, but it's not what, nobody needs what you have. And he took notes of what we actually need, I told him.
For
And
next
he
year.
said next year we're going to make it better.
Yeah.
It's probably going to get better and better
The
every year.
beans, especially the
I told him.
fava beans.
So he
the
said
white
he has
beans,
fava beans there. I didn't see them, but he said he had them.
Fulim damash. So this is an easy
So-
question.
so
What happens if I
the-
take the skola pasta, if I take this pasta strainer, and now I want to use it, I just want to do hagala. So
you don't
that
even
seems
need
to
to
have
deep it.
more. That seems to have more universal acceptance.
But you
Because-
don't even need to deep it. If you
Just
never use
reuse
it
it.
by deeping it, but
Correct.
by pouring stuff, you
Right.
just pour stuff on it.
Okay, but I don't want to get my countertop dirty.
Yeah, so
Or wait. So I want to. So is it okay? Is it okay for me to do hagala instead of irui, instead of pouring from it?
I don't know. You're
This, by the way, what's really good for this? Those electric kumkumin that you can heat up, and you like the pitchers
yeah.
with a base. Because once the thing is boiling, you can any utensil used this way you can use that for. So that's a little bit more universally accepted. The question is, can I possibly kasher anything else with a torch if that's not how it absorbs? The Sephardim say yes, you can, even lechatchila. Ashkenazim say maybe b'diavad, or only in a safek. So where's the safek? Safek is here. I have fire, I have a pan. So fire, pan, and chametz. And there's no, in a frying pan or a wok, there's no liquid medium. Maybe I put a tablespoon or two of oil. What's a tablespoon or two of oil going to do? You're going to tell me that at any one point there's no raw chametz touching, the pan?
No, you're right.
Or what if I put in the teriyaki before I put in the oil? So here,
But still, the fire did not touch the.
Rovadia wants
The
to say
food.
like this. It's a very interesting teshuvah on his part. He wants to say, first of all, when it comes to koshering utensils for Pesach, we do this in accordance with the Shulchan Aruch, based on the majority usage of a utensil. And normally, when you're frying in a pan, you add oil. Normally. You're going to make eggs, whatever it is you're going to make. Even if you do it in Teflon, the oil adds flavor. It's not just for to prevent it from sticking. So because the majority of the time that you're frying something in a pan, you're doing it with oil, he wants to say the oil should be considered the liquid medium. It may not be always there, it may not be all over the pan, but at the end of the day, it's significant enough that it should count as a liquid medium. So Rav Ovadia wants to say, frying pans can be kashered with hagala. They don't need limon. Which is very interesting because since the advent of Teflon, they'll tell you that Teflon should never be exposed to an open flame. That's why the whole pot's not made of Teflon, just the interior of it. The rest of it's not designed that way. Okay, easy enough to digest. This is the case the Ashkenazim make for the cover of these aluminum or stainless steel cauldrons that they use to boil water on Shabbat. If I put chalot, here's the thing. This has to do with another halakha in Hilchot Shabbat. The Ashkenazim are very machmirim when it comes to bishul on Shabbat. Right? We had this discussion once talking about Hilchot Shabbat. And bishul ahar bishul, you cannot cook that which is cooked, and therefore once it was cooked, you can't be guilty of having cooked it again on Shabbat because it's already been cooked for you or by you. So the Sephardim understand en bishul ahar bishul, any form of cooking. So if I grill the steak nice and rare before Shabbat, I can reheat it in my oven or on the plata. Why? Because it's already been cooked. The Ashkenazim hold, no, bishul only means cooking in water. Right? By the Korban Pesach, what does it say? Lo tochal mimenu na uvashel mevushal b'mayim. You can't eat from it raw, and you can't eat from it cooked in water. So no tartar, no carpaccio on Pesach, from the Korban Pesach. It needs to be roasted, and it cannot be cooked in an oven, nor can it be cooked in water, in liquid.
It has to be like in an open flame with
over
a
an
thing
open
that turns.
flame. Spit, we call this in English.
Yeah.
Spit. Very interesting because the French have a steak they call bavette, which is related. So levashel, the Ashkenazim understand not to cook in general with a capital C. They understand to cook with a small c, which is only this one particular usage, which is cooking by way of water. In the event that you're cooking something with water, this they accept as bishul before Shabbat, and that you can heat up on Shabbat, except the Ashkenazim hold that you can't reheat liquids on Shabbat. So that you can reheat on Shabbat in an indirect or unusual way.
After removing the liquid.
After removing the liquid, correct. After removing the liquid. So I have, let's say, meatballs that I cooked in liquid or in some kind of sauce. It's mutar on Shabbat to take these meatballs that have already been cooked. They've been cooled. There's no more sauce left on them. I can reheat them on Shabbat on a plata or on some kind of indirect heat source, as long as it has some kind of a cover on it, so that it makes it an unusual way to cook on Shabbat. So it's not cooking the way cooking is done, even though it's already been cooked. It's cooking or reheating in an unusual way. So no one's going to look at it and say, David cooks meatballs on Shabbat. Sfaradim, they live in trees, they pray to the stars. So the question then becomes, what's the nature of this minhag to cook over the kumkum? This happens to be very lechatchila by the Ashkenazim. It's like the best situation you can possibly have is where you're cooking over something so indirect and so unusual that it's actually ideal, because no one will ever suspect that you cooked like this on Shabbat. How weird would it be if you saw somebody trying to fry a fish on top of the kumkum? You would say, this is bizarre, this guy needs an intervention. So because it's unusual, they hold that it's great. But because you're basically allowing chametz to contact the metal with a heat source below it, and without adding any oil, they say really ideally what you should be doing here is libun, not hagala. I found this out when I went to do hagarat kelim one year, and it was an Ashkenazi guy who was doing it. I mean, it was his backyard. He had a big thing with propane and a big cauldron. So he got very upset about this. He said, "What do you mean? How could you put a frying pan in the hagala?" I said, "No, it's like a Sholem Rav Ovadia says so." So he said, "Okay." your responsibility. I don't care if you rendered everybody else's kidding not kasher lePesach. Your problem and not mine. So, good example of something that we can use in terms of halacha, where we have a little bit of flexibility. The Chazim don't necessarily understand it. That's okay, but you can definitely make the point that Rav Ovadia is machshir. He accepts this, he acknowledges this. Another interesting question, and this I've seen. You'll see reference to this around. What's the nature of the edges of your kilim? Some people are very OCD about the edges of their kilim. So normally in industrial processes, metal is very easy to manipulate when you apply a lot of pressure to it. Have you ever seen a video of like how they make soda cans? Never seen this. It's an amazing thing because the can is extremely thin, but it's very consistent and it's very strong. They use, obviously, this is economics. It's not environmentalist. You want to use the minimum amount of materials and you want to make it, as strong as possible. So what they do is they take a piece of aluminum, they crush it, and they punch it through 14 or 15 consecutive molds, making it bigger, but perfectly uniform on all sides. So when they make stainless steel pots and pans, you don't think of stainless steel as something that you can punch through a mold and fold, but with a lot of pressure, this is how they make high precision utensils. And so you'll notice that most of the relatively simple, even some of the higher end stuff, most of the relatively simple stuff, at the top it has these edges that roll around. And that's to basically prevent you from having a sharp edge at the end of the pot. They just fold it, right? Kifit tahara is how we describe this in clothing. It's a bad example of a shirt, but you'll fold over, you'll make a cuff or a hem. The same idea, so you don't have loose edges exposed. So what happens, this is a very related question on the same topic, what happens if Dawid is cooking pasta and he had an Italian lapse and the pot boiled over? Happens sometimes, only to novices, not to professionals, but it happens. So you want to tell me that you had water that was totally chametz inside the pot, and there you had liquid. What happens when it boils over to the other side?
Well, the outside of your pot is chametz as well, no?
I mean,
I
wasn't making the case that I could turn the pot over and use it for Pessah.
Yeah.
But what happens now? Let's say even I have a small piece of pasta that spilled over while it was foaming and bubbling.
So what about inside the part that is rolled over?
So let's first of all make it even simpler. What about the outside of the pot? So let's say I have a piece of pasta that migrated from the inside of the pot to the outside of the pot. All the water boiled off. Now what's happening to it? We're back to the frying pan scenario.
Well, we're actually back to the pasta filter scenario. If you reboil it afterwards, you actually get the taste out the same way, don't you?
I would say yes if I had poured the pasta out of the pot that was over the fire and it spilled over that way. Then I would say I agree with you because you pour hot water on it and it would be fine.
So you don't
the pot's still on the fire. It boiled over.
So
a piece of pasta migrated from the inside to the outside.
You have it boil over again without the pasta.
Well, my first question is what happens now that I have a piece of pasta stuck to the outside of the pot? I've seen this happen, by the way. It's not a totally uncommon thing. I'm not a pasta expert or aficionado, but so now I have a piece of pasta on the outside of the pot. As the pot continues to cook, what happens to the pasta?
Cooks. It
cooks until it gets stuck on the outside of the pot. And now it's being heated up by a flame without water, unmediated, so to speak. So you have the same question. Fine, the Sephardim smile politely. Yes, but that's not how you normally use a pot. And if you use your pots this way intentionally, you need intervention. It's time for help. The Ashkenazim will tell you, okay, but we hold that even minority uses are still considered this way. So if something boils over to the outside of the pot, they'll tell you, listen, and effectively what they've done is they've rendered the entire Torah of Hagala unnecessary or obsolete. Everything needs to be more. Why is this? Because sometimes you cook pasta without water, or you cook it off until there's no water left on the outside of the pot. And it's fire plus metal minus liquid. You follow?
Yeah.
There are those who wanted to say that for this reason, if your pot has a lip on the outside, if it's a little bit of curled metal all around, that needs to be cleaned, or maybe it can't be cleaned, but there might be pieces of pasta in there, etc. So you end up basically buying new utensils as the least expensive way to pass your Pessah. But the logic is the same. Because chametz is asur bekaret, there tends to be a very pronounced inclination towards humra on Pesach. By the Sfaradim to an extent, by the Ashkenazim without measure or mitigation. It's just everything mahmir across the board. So you have also the famous discussion about kitniot. By the way, I understand that for the most part, kitniot was the quinoa was delisted this year. It used to be on and then off. I think the Star K were the first ones to say this just isn't kitniot at all, and it shouldn't be. They let it go. Then I think there were some questions asked by a few other badatzim. They stopped. The OU accepted it for a time. I think now it's pretty much been hashed out that it should not count. But for the sake of anyone who plans to or intends to host Ashkenazim or to be hosted by them, the list of spices that you would need to be careful about is effectively caraway, coriander, cumin, fennel, fenugreek, anise seed also I forgot, and I believe
mustard.
And mustard seeds. Yeah, right there. So 6 or 7 spices that are pretty ubiquitous in the kitchen that have gotten squashed by kitniot. So have it in mind. And although there's no reason for Sfaradim to avoid them, Rav Amar a couple of years ago wanted to forbid cumin on Pesach.
A Moroccan.
Yeah, not even so clear why of all things. I think what they said was they used to rotate the crops, so oatmeal and cumin don't compete for the same nutrients, at least not very aggressively, and that they made good neighbors, and that's why they used to harvest them, and every so often you had a certain amount of oats inside the cumin. But again, it would be batel before Pesach. I don't see why it would be an issue. So there was a whole issue. The Rabbanot was fighting back and forth, and in the end, I think they made a recommendation. I shouldn't have them. I don't see the point. And if your cumin is ground, bichlal, I don't see the point. If the cumin is whole, so go through it. Take it out. You see something, you take it out. All my 38 years, I haven't seen chametz and cumin, but you're welcome to obsess if you'd like to. Where else? I think I was told this year, I spoke to Rabbi Marmerstein. He said that there are different forces in the market that determine how things that it's possible to produce from more than one source can or should be produced. So every large industrial giant, right? Monsanto, Heinz to a degree, Hellman's, these companies that go through megatons of commodities, they all employ people to follow the commodities, the COMEX exchange. Mm-hmm. If today wheat is a little bit cheaper than corn, or the wheat vinegar is a little bit cheaper than corn vinegar, then I'll buy a few 100,000 tons of that. If today the wheat ethanol is less expensive than the corn ethanol, then we'll start buying from that. Apparently, there were a number of years, you'll see that some of the Sephardi lists backed off it a little bit. Apparently there were a number of years where corn was consistently less expensive than wheat. And since George W. Bush, this is the most recent one, made a law that I think 10% of U.S. petroleum is supposed to be distilled and mixed with corn-based ethanol, the price of corn has gone up. And in some cases it passed the price of wheat. It's all a function of how many products you can make from it. And they've got it pretty solidly down to a few dozen products that are very useful and very helpful. So because the price of corn went up, all of a sudden, apparently, over the course of the past 12 months, there are more of these potential switch hitters that are being distilled from grains today, from chametz grains. So vitamin C is one of them. Ethanol is another. There's a few other examples of pretty common industrial additives. So b'kitzur, unless you found a competent Sephardi list that can stand behind a particular brand of product, it's probably best to we don't want to roll the dice on these things. But grain vinegar would be asur just like chametz in an even more familiar form. So there's no reason.
What about rice vinegar?
Rice vinegar would be mutar legamai. It's distilled.
Don't we need to ascertain the origin of the alcohol? Like if we say if
rice vinegar or rice alcohol?
You buy rice vinegar. I'm just asking because it happened to me once, I think, not in America, that you buy rice vinegar, and then if you look in the ingredients, it has different kind of alcohol. There is alcohol that comes from the fermentation of rice, I assume. There is also, they mix it up with alcohols coming from regular wine alcohol.
Okay, I'm talking about pure.
Yeah, but when
you can get apple cider vinegar that's made of nothing but apple cider vinegar.
right,
Mutar legamre, you have no issues with it.
and you don't
If
have
it has
to
colorings, if it has flavorings, if it has other additives in it, I can't
But
certify
when it
that.
says
I can say-
alcohol in there, do you need to ascertain when it's alcohol?
if it has alcohol in it, that's potentially problematic. Yeah, I don't know why they would add alcohol to a vinegar. It's a bizarre thing.
But almost every
Alcohol can be converted to vinegar eventually. It happens when wine goes bad.
every vinegar you buy, in the ingredient it lists alcohol. Now, if it's the part of the process of vinegar or not, I don't know, but it lists alcohol all the time.
Well, if the process of producing acetic acid inevitably involves converting ethanol into vinegar, if the conversion process has a certain degree of efficiency, so normally the vinegar is diluted to they call them points, to 3% or 5%. That's usually the industrial standard. If there's a residual amount of alcohol in it, this is batel bero. If the alcohol was added after the process was concluded for a particular reason, that's more problematic. That's
Right.
already a function of ten tam. If the alcohol is there to preserve the flavor or to enhance the flavor, that's a separate issue. No fermentation process is 100% accurate. Meaning, what happens is normally the microbes, it works on what they call, I forget the name of this thing, like a trapezoidal effect. How in the beginning the microbes they break down the sugars into alcohol. Normally the alcohol, the fermentation process peaks somewhere between 10 and 14%, at which point the microbes are still, usually it's fungus or bacteria, they're continuing to produce alcohol, but they're also dying because of toxicity. It's a waste product for them, and it disturbs their metabolism. So the production, starts slow. It turns very sharp upward. Then it plateaus at a certain level, at which point all the microbes die. They can't produce any more alcohol. So, again, if it's residual alcohol from the process itself, if that's what I was trying to avoid, I was trying to ferment all of it out, get rid of all of it, so that there would be no alcohol left, and I'd have pure vinegar, that's not something that we added for flavor. It's something that was naturally batel bero. If you went ahead and reintroduced it afterwards, that's more of a problem. They'll do that sometimes in the winemaking process. They'll add other fruit juices, that are specifically meant not to be fermented, just to give certain flavors. In beer, they do that a lot.
That's the same way, like you say you go to a Japanese restaurant, you see soy sauce, or that is technically done with rice vinegar. And then sometimes it's actually not done with rice vinegar, it's done with
Rice wine.
or other vinegar.
So I'd recommend not going to Japanese restaurants without hashgacha
Exactly.
or Pessah,
Yeah,
which is the point that you came to reinforce.
Right. Right.
Very, very valid point. But yeah, there are a lot of other flavorings that you need to be aware of. It's a dangerous game to play, to try to judge things based on the ingredients, because it's hard to know what the sources are. People ask me a lot of questions about baby foods and cereals. So maltodextrin is one of the flavors that you get from basically wheat and more specifically barley. It's a very commonly used additive for flavor. So maltodextrin is a caramelized sugar. It's something they use. It's basically the main ingredient of beer, by the way. You can make beer out of raw grains, but you get different flavors by roasting your barley first and then fermenting it. And what that does is it changes some of the sugars that we can't detect into sugars that we can. It gives you a little bit of bitterness to balance a little bit of the sweetness. Chocolate is roasted. It works well with sugar, but it's very bitter from the roasting process. Anyway, that's the way that process works. And so malt is very common. When I was little, what they call today milkshakes, they used to call malted. Couldn't tell you why. I don't know if this originates from the island of Malta. I have no idea, but it's just one of those things that they historically, it goes back to the Egyptians. You could roast the barley and then make a fermented drink out of it. It tastes much better than when you do it raw. So roasting barley, in order to get this flavor out of it, generally speaking, is the flavor is extracted after you separate it in some kind of a liquid. So that would make it chametz gamur, nothing you can do with it. happens to be this is a very ubiquitous flavoring. It's everywhere. It's in ice creams. It's in bakery goods. It's anywhere you want some kind of a sugar. I think also, if I'm not mistaken, they add this particular sugar to some fermented products because it doesn't ferment very easily. So if you're going to ferment something and you want this flavor, this particular sweetness to stay, you can add the beginning of the fermentation process and you can continue it and it will ferment out. I've seen that before. So those are good things to know when it comes to avoiding things. Vinegar for sure, alcohol, maltodextrin, vitamin C, etc. All things to be aware of. Let me see what else we had. The typical questions about fish, chicken, and meats. So just so you know, there happens to have been, this appears in the Shulchan Aruch, that there was a suspicion that if you slaughtered a chicken on Pesach, and the chicken itself was eating grains, with or without your permission, I mean, you're not allowed to feed it, it's hana'ah. Chametz on Pesach, you can't even use it for your own benefit. So it's not like you can keep bread, and I can say, look, the bread, I'm not going to eat it, but I'm going to feed it to my chickens. You can't even feed bread to your chickens on Pesach. But let's say your chickens were out and they ate grain. They found grains and they ate them. So if you slaughtered a chicken on Pesach, and you cooked it with its stomach contents inside it for some very bizarre reason, because usually people clean the intestines.
Clean it up usually.
You're telling me?
Yeah, right.
I don't know why, but the expression appears that if you cooked a chicken and you found a grain inside it, maybe the grain was stuck in the esophagus. I don't know how thoroughly they clean birds. I just can only look. You took out the feathers, you took out the guts. Otherwise, there isn't much to eat. It just makes the whole thing taste nasty. But some of these discussions, they go back a long time. But again, that was the reality. Today we eviscerate birds. Like, it's illegal to sell birds that have intestines in them. You can't. You go to jail for doing things like this in America. So there is
because of the illness that it brings, or
because it has fecal content.
oh,
Because you're not allowed to sell anything that has that. The same.
duara.
Huh?
Like the duara.
The duara, of course, right. So
That's why it's illegal.
yes, no, you can clean them. You have to have a program. You can clean them. There are certain food-safe sanitizing agents you can use to, kill the bacteria, etc. But you have to have a program. You have to have proof that you're implementing the program, and they'll inspect it and approve. It's a big headache. It's a big pain. So, what happens with meats? This became a big obsession that people have, and then you just pay more for the kasher Pesach. There's no reason, even if they were introducing some infinitesimally small percentage of some kind of vinegar or alcohol or whatever it is that could potentially be chametz, according to Sfaradim, it's completely batel before Pesach. It definitely wasn't introduced in order to give flavor. If anything, it was introduced to prevent the flavor from degenerating, or to prevent the meat from decomposing. Whatever purpose it served before Pesach. But there's no reason to buy anything special. Kasher Pesach, not meat, not poultry, not.
So any meat that I had
fish.
before Pesach, I can eat it on Pesach.
Yeah, that shouldn't be a question. If you cooked it, it's something else, but that's a separate issue. It's not the same. It's not the same discussion already. What else has come? So there are discussions about different foodstuffs and how they were prepared before Pesach, whether you can eat them or not. Probably this goes back to a time when people couldn't throw anything away and they couldn't really afford it. But the Shulchan Aruch does not forbid for Pesach consumption anything that was cooked in utensils that weren't made kasher Pesach beforehand, because he holds that the flavor they might have absorbed is itself batel. I mean, it's unlikely that the flavor.
But not if you cook it on Pesach.
Cooking on Pesach, no. But that's for the same reason that we said Seudah Shlishit, that we can't intentionally take something forbidden and nullify it, even if it's in a million, a proportion of 1 to a million. So I can't take a pot that I used for pasta and intentionally cook something on it on Pesach, cook something in it on Pesach, just for the sake of saying, here, I used the pot that should have been forbidden, now it's permitted. But if I cook something with it without any such intention, I cooked potatoes in a pasta pot. Why? Because I wanted potatoes. So I'm not looking to cheat the system. I'm not looking to take something non-kosher and make it kosher. This we don't necessarily hold as asur for consumption on Pesach. No one cooked it before Pesach. And so the Shulchan Aruch will tell you, so why do we kasher our utensils in the first place? So that you can use them, ideally, on Pesach. As opposed to relying on, or you have to cook everything else ahead of time. That's what we're looking to avoid.
I have one more question.
Sure.
Kashering the sink. I know usually if I want to kasher something, I have to let it rest for like 24 hours. How do you do that? The sink is pretty tough. So what kind of use can you not do during those 24 hours?
Hot.
Only hot.
That's it. Only hot liquids. Yeah.
How hot?
Hot salads, technically. Hot, yad soledbo. For whatever's considered cooking for Shabbat, it's considered cooking for every other purpose.
So the hot water from the and if I mix it with soap, it doesn't count like cooking anymore? Because it's not food, or does it count?
If you
like doing the dishes with hot water.
yeah, in industry we tend to be a little bit more lenient because there are certain processes that need to just take a long time, and if I make you wait an extra 24 hours in a factory, it's just going to take forever. So I've seen it done in industry where they'll introduce some of these harsh chemicals that destroy everything they touch, including your lungs, and they'll try to cut down the 24-hour period that way. The idea.
Not that I want to cut 24 hours.
No,
if I use hot water with soap during those 24 hours, do I have to recount the 24 hours again?
Ideally, we would tell you don't use hot water.
Okay.
Just don't use hot water. If you're going to be using the point, the Rashba makes this point that if you're cooking, say for example, I have a pot that I used to cook pasta. Okay. The metals weren't the metals we have today for sure, and I'm sure more residue was stuck there. Chazal knew what they were saying. They weren't looking to be tricked. Sorry. So if I take a pot that I used to cook pasta and I cleaned it, and then in less than 24 hours I cooked vegetables in it, the Rashba says, okay, now you start your 24-hour clock again. Why? Because we assume that after 24 hours the flavor components have decomposed. And if you cook something, you effectively sterilized it. We know today you've pasteurized the thing, and you've prevented the degradation of the flavor that was there. That was his argument. So the question is, does that happen with soap? Well, soap actually destroys the flavor. It makes it inedible. It makes it irrelevant. But we do try to avoid that where possible. That's the famous discussion about the dishwasher. True, I'm cooking hot water or steam, and I'm introducing milk and meat into this environment. But if it's done with soap from beginning to end, then I've ruined the meat and I've ruined the milk before they even mixed. So it's no longer meat and it's no longer milk, and I'm no longer mixing milk and meat. That's the way we would look at that.
But what would be the issue with the sink? Like, what would be the potential problem of not cashering the sink?
Well,
if you put your stuff in there, if you let them.
Well, then what? I wash it with soap anyway. If you think that soap has that ability to nullify things, what's the problem?
You're relying on nullification. You're saying there may be non-kosher things going on in my sink, but I'm going to nullify it with soap. That would be like me telling you, let your housekeeper, cook bacon in your house.
No, actually I'm not.
And then when she puts her tarif utensils into your sink, what's the big deal? Because you have soap. So maybe b'di'avad you could figure something out. I would try to avoid it. What would happen is that if you take, for example, so you have you're cooking pasta before Pessah. Okay. By the way, Erev Pessah, just to put that out there, Chazal ate intestines with rice. That's what the Gemara says. Intestines with rice. So I don't know if they grilled the intestines.
Do you hold them in
scatter them over the rice? It's hard enough to get intestines. I went to the slaughterhouse today, and a beautiful grass-fed cow was.
We can tell.
I know, it's just. No, you can see my physical suffering. You can't see my emotional suffering. So those would have been the water that I would have made use of. But the Gemara itself mentions they ate rice already. Rice. This is after Chatzot on Pesach. How did Chazal eat without eating chametz and without eating matzah? They ate rice. Clearly, this is an indication that rice wasn't considered kitnel at the time. But I don't know if it was intestines stuffed with rice. Just an interesting comment that the Gemara makes. That's what they ate. So long story short is like this. What happens if you're cooking pasta Erev Pesach and you pour the pasta into the sink? You have a strainer, but effectively what does a strainer do? It doesn't stop the water from coming through. It keeps the pasta and it loses the water. So you've poured boiling hot pasta water into your sink. If later that night you were to tell me that you had a pot of potatoes and you dumped it out into the sink for whatever reason, then I'll tell you, Tov, your potatoes came into contact with a sink that's currently chametz associated. It may be an accident, but it might be an accident where we'd have to say, Tov, the custom is to be strict.
But I don't cook in the sink. I don't put food in the sink.
You're not cooking in the sink. You might have dumped boiling hot chametz into the sink.
But what would be the problem? I mean, I wouldn't.
Because if you happen to have, if you dumped potatoes the same way, you've basically done the same thing in the sink twice, boiling hot.
But would you agree that if the only issue that I have is that I put a dirty, like we do the pasta thing I just said.
Okay.
And then the other thing that we do during Pessah is a dirty plate that I just put in the sink to wash it. In that case, if that's the only thing I do, why do I have
Hot
to?
water or cold water?
Even if it's hot water, I'm washing a plate that is dirty, there is no food in it because for me that's not food anymore, and I'm washing
But
it.
it might not be food for you, but technically, if it's
The
still
dog
meat
would
or
eat
if
it.
it's still milk, I mean, it's still edible. You're telling me you ate a steak and you left 3 pieces on
Yeah,
that
but
plate.
then that food I'm not gonna eat it. That food gonna get in touch because it's something that is not edible for me, right? So I wouldn't eat it.
But you have it in your sink. You add hot water to the situation, now you have bishul. You don't have to intend for it to be bishul. By the way, you want to get really haredi. So the answer to your question, the answer to his question is the opposite. I'll give you a simple scenario. What if I only have one sink? I never use hot water in my sink.
Because
We
of
intentionally
dairy
avoid
meat?
it. I don't want to make any mixes, right? We only have one sink. There's always dairy and meat there. So we use cold to warm water. In the once every so often that someone comes to help clean up, so she knows not to use, the hot water. In your case,
So that's what you do. You're alone.
we only have one sink in my apartment. I mean, it is
Me
what it
too,
is.
but
How many?
we-
Who in New York City has 2 sinks? I don't know.
I do.
Okay, and Shlomo and Andrea do.
I still
But
I still a couple apartments like that.
The 2 sinks are small.
That's so small. Yeah.
It's like a Soho thing that it's chic only if it's small.
But basically,
it's too
we,
big and it's
we clean
other
the
stuff.
2 dairy stuff we have in the bathroom, pretty much.
Right. I know a family does that too in the bathtub. So, Lemaaseh, the Haredim raised an interesting question about this. Bishul is bishul. You don't have to want it to be bishul. You don't have to, there's no kavanah. You don't have to push a button and say, this time the hot water cooks, this time the hot water doesn't cook. So the Haredim asked the question, some of the Haredi community asked this question, what happens if the hot water mixes in the drain that comes out of your sink? So you're washing milk, let's say cheese. You wash pieces of cheese off of a plate. And then afterwards you wash pieces of meat off of a plate. And then you dump hot water into the sink.
Okay. So your sink is still okay.
You've done bishul of basar v'halav, and even if you're not benefiting from it, it's still a sur, in theory.
So, but then if that's the case, then why the dishwasher is allowed? The whole.
They'll tell you, use the dishwasher either for meat or for milk.
But we said that I think we said that if you wash it once and then you do a dry wash, then you can use it.
You can kosher it. If I want to change uses, like if I always use it for meat, and one day I had a bunch of Italians over who decided they eat chalavi on Shabbat. I said, okay, so I can use my dishwasher in order to wash these dairy dishes, as long as I keep the thing clean. I empty the filter.
But not together.
So, using it together, there the chidush was that we'd be relying on an opinion quoted by the Bet Yosef. He brings Mahari Kol.
About the soap, right?
Well, it wasn't soap, it was potash, but yeah,
Right.
I'm using ashes from.
But it's b'di'avad or it's lechatchila?
So
Or
he
in
he
between?
mentions this. He doesn't comment so much on
So
it.
that
But
would-
so most of the Farshim understood that he was okay with this, as long as there was some kind of a companion.
But then
So
if
if I only
that-
have one dishwasher, and I use soap, and it destroys the flavor. Sometimes people do a pre-wash, or
And
they'll
the
take
water
soap
is
and hot
hot.
water. My father always did this. He would take soap and hot water. He would dip the dishes in before he puts them into the.
Yeah.
So there's soap on it even before I did anything. I destroyed all the flavors.
Yeah.
So this is already.
So, but then if you abide by that, then you can do the same thing for the dish for the sink. Why the sink would be different?
Because the simpler answer would be, look, and to go back to the question about the pipes, the drainage pipes.
But
it's
there
not
is
that
soap
I'm
there.
intending or
so-
not intending. Yeah, but so there's always a mess there. Anything that goes into those pipes is so nasty that it's no longer considered edible by any human standard, and
Even
therefore
animals
we
do.
don't care what happens to it. Even animals don't go in there, which is New York City. But the milk or the meat that makes it out of your sink, which is relatively clean, even when it's full, into the drainage pipes where all the jifa, all the garbage goes for the entire week, that's already so destructive. The place itself is so nasty that there's nothing. It's not that it's not considered bishul. If you pour boiling water down there, it is bishul, but you're boiling garbage. It's basically summertime in New York City. So when it comes to the sink, we don't ideally want to create situations where you're cooking either chametz matzah or where you're cooking milk and meat, even if it's not your intention. Nobody intends to cook anything in the sink, but it could be that you had a piece of this or a piece of that. You dump hot water, and maybe you forget the soap. So he'll tell me, normally I'm really good about this, today I forgot. So I'll say, okay, so better you should, come situations like that at all. If you can, take off whatever solid waste you can beforehand. And if you're going to use the sink, so either use it with cool or hot water. That way there's no bishul issue at all, and it's kasher Pesach, it's kasher all year round. Or you can use it for milk and meat, and you can switch because it doesn't make a difference. I'm not intentionally cooking anything. And at the very least, if I do, I use soap. So if I do cook, it's not to exchange flavors, it's to ruin all of them. So the hot water serves the purpose of ruining all of them. Okay, yeah. Could be that she needs some different. Another question, yeah.
Yeah, can we talk about
You want to take a break for a second?
the process for Bedikat Hamatz and Bitul? If, for example, in my case, I leave the day before Pesach.
Just ask her if it's urgent, and so we finish. So
Yeah.
you're leaving before Pesach.
So technically, I should do the Bedikat Hamatz on
Okay.
Thursday.
What it says in the Mishnah and the Gemara is that if any home that you own or that you rent or that you lease, it could be office space, it could be a car, it could be anything. Any space under your possession or with your name on the lease, where you're the leaseholder, becomes your responsibility to clean if it's in your possession the night of the 14th. But I can't be everywhere at every time. Okay, so find a shaliach, appoint someone to go check if there is chametz, and if there is, to get rid of it. If you're leaving 30 days before Pesach, and chances are you're not coming back and you know this, it's one thing. If you're leaving less than 30 days before Pesach, or you know that you are coming back, something else. Today it's not so much, our travel plans are pretty clear. If you have an apartment that you're subletting to someone else, it's his responsibility. If the guy's not Jewish, it doesn't matter, it could be tzvah, doesn't apply to him. If the guy is Jewish, religious or not, it's his responsibility, it's not yours. If what you're looking to do is to get rid of the obligation to check anyway for chametz, then the answer is that might work in the event that you rented or sold the apartment, so to speak. Not everybody's very excited about this option, but it exists.
No, but I'm actually not planning to do that. I'm checking it anyway. What I'm trying to understand is what would be the process if I do the Bedikat Hametz the night before.
Mhm.
So instead of doing Thursday night, I will have to do Wednesday night. I clean my apartment already.
Yeah, so that we just don't make a bracha.
Yeah, don't make the bracha. I put all my hametz in one closet, and I sell it through the. I mean, if I have any hametz left, I try not to. If whatever I have left, or even if I don't have left, I sell it everywhere. And then the morning after, do I do the Kabbalah thing of the 10 pieces, even if it's not the night before?
That's Kabbalah. It's a custom. You want to do it, you do it. You don't want to do it, you don't have to. But that's a Kabbalistic thing. If that's the only B'dikat Hametz you're going to be doing, and you don't want to miss the Kabbalistic Inyan, go ahead.
Even if it's not the exact perfect time.
Yeah. No, let's keep talking about this.
And the morning after.
The morning after, you don't need to do a Bitul Chametz. You need to do a Bitul Chametz when the interdiction of owning Chametz is near.
Okay.
So it doesn't. You could make a bitul chametz then, but then you're going to buy more chametz on your way to the airport. You're going to buy more when you get back home. What's the point? You don't want to make a bitul before you acquire more chametz. So wherever you are in the world, if you spend Pesach in China, and you have an apartment in Soho, it's where you are at that particular moment that determines what's asur for you to possess, no matter where it is. So the time zone in which you find yourself, wherever you're going to be spending Pesach, intentionally or by accident, that's the time zone that determines how you go about this.
And then do bitul then?
Yes. You do a bitul then that has all of the buildings, apartments, boats, cars, anything in your possession, office space. Yeah.
Which is only saying the kol hamira itself.
Kol hamira, yeah. We say a shorter version on the night after the bdika.
Right.
And then we make a longer version the following morning, which is a little
So
bit.
in my case, it would be the Bedikat on Wednesday night and the Bitul on Friday morning, because I'm traveling on Thursday.
Bidika on Wednesday night. Bi'ul, you can get rid of it and burn it or throw it away or whatever.
If I find anything, or
If you find anything, or the pieces that you collected intentionally, get rid of.
On Thursday morning.
The same night of the bdika.
It's not. Don't you have to wait the morning for the Bitul?
You can if you're here in the morning.
Yeah, I'm here on Thursday morning, and then I leave on Thursday night.
So then you can do the bi'ur the following day, but that's the purpose of doing the bi'ur then, is that's the time when chametz is asur. I don't know if there's a point to wait until the morning.
So I'll do it at Bedikat.
Do the bidika, burn, get rid of whatever it is.
And then the Bitul do it Friday morning in Rome already.
Wherever you were, if you're going to be in Rome, you would do it in Rome, yeah. But the idea there is that that obligation isn't on the apartment, it's not on the space, it's not on where you parked your car, it's on where you, the individual, are located when, the fourth hour of the day.
So if your chametz is in a place where it's already Pesach, but
you're not violating anything.
You're not violating anything.
Correct. And if you're in a place where it's asur to own chametz, but you have an apartment that's not yet in Pesach time in California, you're still violating the isur, and the locals are not.
And then if you have an apartment that is belongs to you, but you plan to you bought it, you plan to rent it out, but you haven't rented it out yet. So the apartment is technically empty. It belongs to you, but you don't live there and you don't plan to live there because you plan to rent it out, but you haven't happened to rent it out yet. Do you have to clean it and you have to search the hametz and do everything?
If it's in your possession, either you or someone else, an agent instead of you. So what you can do is you can
sell
arrange for a sale of any chametz that you own.
So
the poskim don't like relying on one thing alone.
Right.
They don't like the idea of saying, I'm just going to make a bitul and I'm done. It's the first tosafot on the first page of Masechet Pesachim. Why do we check for chametz the night of if Chazal tell us later in the chapter that we have an minhag to make a bitul chametz? So I'm checking for chametz now. Why don't I just make a bitul? I can spend the entire Pesach with a loaf of challah on my table, look at it and say, you're mevutal. I nullify you, I deny any relationship to you, and I relinquish any ownership over you. So what's the point of doing the bdikha? And they tell you, because Chazal didn't want to rely on one thing alone.
Because it's a
you
big
checked,
deal,
maybe you missed something. You did a bitul, maybe you didn't really mean it. You sold it, maybe you didn't really mean that. The sale wasn't such a common thing back then, but the idea is that if you rely only on one thing, they'll have their advantages and disadvantages. So maybe you made the sale, hopefully you meant it, the goy meant it, it should be valid. We designed it such that it should be for 100 different reasons. Still people don't like it. Maybe you checked, but you might have missed something. Maybe you were mevatel something, but something came into your possession afterwards you didn't know about. By the way, classic. This is one of those things, it's like rabbi trivia that no one else is really aware of. If on Pesach, for whatever reason, chametz comes into your possession, right away the first thing you have to do is to do a bitul.
Yeah.
You
so
can
if,
burn
for
it
example,
if
my colleague put something on my desk and says, here it's yours, I brought it from somewhere or whatever.
Right, so he can put it on your desk and you don't know about it. It's not, you need some kind of da'at.
It happened to me once. They were distributing bunny chocolates everywhere in the desk in France. And it's not mine. And
for Easter?
Yeah.
The bunny thing caught on in France too?
Yeah.
What does a bunny have to do with Easter? I want to know. There's got to be an explanation for this. Bunnies and eggs. They're mammals. What do you want from the bunnies? What
the eggs is connected with
I mean, you could say avilut and reincarnation. Who knows? But at any rate, yeah, that's the way it typically works. If you didn't know about it, then you didn't necessarily acquire it.
I mean, after I came back, I see a bunny. That's pretty much what happened that day.
So what you would do in a situation like this is you can just make a declaration and say, there, any chametz in my possession is batel, it's null, it's void, I never accept it to begin with.
And if I leave the money until after Pesach,
yeah, there's simanim in the Shulchan Aruch. What happens if goy owes you money? Instead of giving you the money, he gives you chametz. So he buys you a bottle of whiskey or he gives you green vinegar, whatever. So you cannot accept it until after Pesach. And if he gives it to you, you have to do a bitul, or you just don't accept it. I mean, you find a nice way around it, but you try not to offend him, and at the same time, not to accept it. If you tell him, just leave it over here, you say it without intending to acquire what he's giving you. Meaning it's there, anybody wants to take it can take it, it's not really mine. But that'll be the first thing you do. If you can burn it, you can flush it down the toilet, you can do 100 things to it. But the first thing you should really do is do a bitul. I don't own it, I never intended to. In the event that I did, I don't own it anymore. Something like that. So, any questions you have, feel free to